All right, today is the last lecture on immigration. It's the fourth lecture on immigration. And this is the slide I concluded on in the previous one. And I'm starting on this one just so I can repeat this point, because I think it's a point that I'm going to be reiterating, or that becomes important for the rest of what I'm going to talk about. And that is this first bullet point, that immigration law is civil law, not criminal law. So when someone is out of status or undocumented, overstays their visa, those are all, they are breaking a civil law, which is not a crime. And part of the effort of the last couple decades has been to find other ways of making being illegally in the country a crime. Before I do that, I'll first begin with some of the benefits of immigration to the United States. Immigrants tend to be of prime working age, as opposed to the general US population, which is getting older. One example, US median age in 2010 was 37 years. US Latino median was 27, so just younger. That also connects to the idea that capitalism requires growth, and without immigrants, the US population would actually decline, which is something that's happening throughout the first world on the planet, where first world countries' populations are declining, were it not for immigration. Fortunately for them, there's plenty of immigrants willing to move to the first world, but there's obviously backlash to that. Immigrants also tend to be more entrepreneurial than the native-born population. And so that speaks directly against this idea that immigrants take away jobs. They're actually more likely to create their own job and employ others. Then there are the taxes. There's this implication that immigrants don't pay taxes, and therefore they're a drain on society. And but you know, when they go buy something, it's not like they ask them, oh, if you're undocumented, you don't have to pay state sales tax. No, we all pay it whenever we buy anything. They also buy real estate and pay property taxes. They pay into Social Security when they create their own businesses and get ITIN numbers. They also pay income taxes. With that said, there are certainly situations where people get paid cash and therefore don't report that. But in that case, it's also the employers that are circumventing the paying of taxes. It's not just the undocumented people. Immigrants are undocumented immigrants are believed to have paid $100 billion in taxes in 2022, and yet are not eligible for a lot of benefits, a lot of federal government benefits. Then a couple points on American values and in different ways, you know, from the Statue of Liberty plaque, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. I lift my lamp beside the golden door, to the Wisconsin Constitution of 1848, which gave the right to vote to immigrant men prior to becoming US citizens. They just had to say that they intended to become US citizens one day, and they would be allowed. And then there's one of course, many verses in the Bible This one, Leviticus 1934, and there are different versions of it that use different terms. But this one's convenient for me because it uses the US government term of resident alien. You are to treat the resident alien the same way you treat the native born among you. Love him like yourself, since you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. Next is the concept of comprehensive immigration reform. We have not passed anything that is remotely comprehensive immigration reform since 1986, and even in 1986, it could be argued against it being very comprehensive. But at any rate, it's tends to be a balance between a degree of enforcement of trying to prevent more undocumented immigration to the United States, and on the other hand, allowing a pathway toward legalization and citizenship for the people who are here undocumented. There was a law passed in January of 2025. That was the first standalone immigration law, I think, in 19 years. It's called the Laken-Riley Act. And that one simply says it requires the detainment of non-citizens accused of crimes, including low-level violations like shoplifting. There's a long history of activism for immigration reform. In 2006, the United States had the largest marches in US history that were for the purpose of immigration reform. The largest marches in US history, larger than the civil rights marches, for example, which we tend to think is the largest. There's people doing hunger strikes. We learned about Cesar Chavez, for example, passing away from complications of a hunger strike. But today there's also people in detention centers going on hunger strikes because of the situation they're in. Either the treatment or being held without any information, being held without having committed any crime, etc. There's activism against deportations. People have tried to stop the buses that are deporting people, literally, like chaining their arms to each other and blocking the way for buses to get out. There's infiltrations where people get themselves detained to be able to report on the conditions inside of the detention facilities where they have immigrants. And then a few years ago, there was a lot of dreamer graduations. And so you might remember my discussion on the DREAM Act that has never passed, and DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, during the Obama administration. And so this was an effort by people, typically happens when graduations happen, like in June of each year, where people just have public protests dressed in cap and gown to bring attention to these, to the dreamers, to the young people who are graduating and then are graduating into an uncertain future. Now I'm going to try to talk about recent presidential administrations: Obama, Trump, Biden, and Trump again. Obama had two administrations, 2008 to 2012 and 2012 to 2016. And Obama deported more people than any other president ever. There were 2 million people deported in the course of almost 100 years, from the 1890s to the 1990s. Then President Bush Jr. Deported that same amount in his 2 terms, or almost that amount in 2 terms. Then President Obama more than doubled that in his 2 terms. President Trump, in his first administration, deported 1.5 million. And then Biden, during his administration, deported about the same, almost the same. Obama did a lot of his, a lot of his deportations were with, how do I put this? He had a program that he called Secure Communities, where police and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, would work together. One of the things that they started is the 287G program, which deputizes local police to be able to enforce federal law. This tends to be individual sheriff's departments that send specific officers to be trained to be able to enforce federal law, specifically immigration law. Then towards the end of his second administration, then he started talking about priority enforcement, which meant, that they were only going to target people who have committed crimes, who've broken criminal law. But, that was at the end of it, when they were campaigning for the next presidency. That was when Hillary Clinton was running against President Trump. Under Obama, they also started the E-Verify program. This is where government employers and private employers can do it optionally, can opt in to do this. And that is where they go beyond what IRCA required in 1986, where employers just had to ask for ID and a social security number. With E-Verify, they can run the ID and the social security number to confirm whether they're legitimate or not. And again, when it comes to cutting down on undocumented people in the United States who come here for the purpose of livelihood, I do think that E-Verify is one of the most effective ways. But there's never been the political will to force private employers, companies, and small employers to do that. During the Obama administration, Texas was not honoring the 14th Amendment, specifically in the year 2015, meaning that babies who were born to undocumented mothers were not being given birth certificates in Texas. Ultimately, the following year in 2016, the Supreme Court made them issue birth certificates to them based on the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Now let's talk about the first Trump administration. He sent the National Guard to the US-Mexico border. There were typically between 2,000 and 4,000 troops there. But, you know, this was not the first time. There's actually been a continuous military presence since 1989, so it's not exactly something new. He planned to increase Border Patrol and ICE agents by 15,000. He ultimately was not able to do that. He would also say that he was targeting immigrants with crimes, but there's plenty of evidence that they arrested as many, if not more, people who had not committed crimes. They just arrested as many out-of-status people as possible. Then there was also his famous border wall, where he spent $15 billion to try to build a border wall. And he did build 47 new miles. Sometimes they claim 450 miles. And that's if you include what was upgraded with what is new. And so if you put them both together, then it's 450. And so that helps explain why some sources are so different, you know, 10 times different, depending on what they want to emphasize. With DACA, that was begun during the Obama administration. As of 2021, they can still renew, but they don't allow new applicants. And when I talked about this before, sorry, where is it? Here it is. When I talked about DACA before, I explained that initially there were 800,000 people that benefited from it. Then by 2019, it was down to 700,000. Right now it's down to 600,000. And so basically just each year, there's more and more people with DACA protection that are afraid to renew their DACA protection and just don't renew. During the first Trump administration, one of the things that his administration became known for is for the separation of families, where children were separated from their parents and guardians. Some children, then they weren't able to figure out, like keep track of who the parents were or guardians. There was also children who had to represent themselves in court because people in detention do not have the same rights that US citizens do when they go to prison, because technically they're not in prison. And so they don't have a right to a lawyer. They don't have, you know, right to a phone call. Like a lot of things we assume we have rights to are things that people in detainment aren't given a lot of times. So there were even children who had to represent themselves in court. During the first Trump administration, there were lots of refugees coming in, specifically children from Central America made a huge portion. During the first Trump administration was also during the pandemic. And there he began Title 42 as a public health order, which was in place from 2020 to 2023. And that's so that people that were encountered illegally at the border could be deported without a chance to make a case for them to be able to stay in the United States legally. And so yeah, there was so that was something that began then. There was also another issue with Texas, where in 2018, the federal government was not renewing passports for Mexican Americans that were born in the Rio Grande Valley. And that's because they found that there were some, what do you call them? The women who deliver babies at home. Midwives, thank you. There were midwives that were caught. There were some midwives that were caught having falsified birth certificates saying that a child, that they had delivered a baby in southern Texas to babies that had actually been born in Mexico. And so because they found some instances of that, then they weren't renewing the passports of everyone who had been born to midwives in the Rio Grande Valley. And I actually haven't note, I'm gonna remind myself to look into that, what ended up happening to that, because I don't know. During the first Trump administration was also a mass shooting in El Paso, at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, where a young man in 2019 drove 650 miles in order to get to this Walmart in El Paso. Prior to doing so, wrote a manifesto explaining why he was doing what he was doing, and he was doing what he was doing to counter the Hispanic invasion that he believed was happening. He killed 23 people. 8 of them were actually Mexican citizens. The overwhelming majority were not. He wounded 23 people, only 7 of them were Mexican citizens. It was the deadliest mass shooting of that year, 2019, and the deadliest attack on Latinos in modern history. And even afterwards, he told police that he was targeting Mexicans. And so it was that climate that we were in during the first Trump administration that inspired him to do this action. And again, it also reminds me of this idea where even though President Obama deported more people, even though President Obama doubled the size of ICE, people's reality, people's impression of reality, even though we have more access to information than ever before, was more skewed, was as skewed as ever. Even though ICE had been doubled, even though more people had been deported than ever before, the impression that the public got was not that that was happening. It was that things were out of control. Again, reminds me of the Mexican crime wave in 42 and the Zoot Suit riots happening afterwards, where the intention is to demonstrate they were cracking down on crime, and the public perception ends up being the opposite. Unfortunately, these hate crimes seem to be continuing from 2015 to 2017, 2019, 2021, 2023. And we'll see what 2025 brings. But the trend is there that hate crimes against Latinos have been growing for a while. So again, this showing the removal, essentially deportations of people, had been going up from 2002 to 2012, the most in 2012. Then they had been going down, and then they went up under the first Trump administration, but not to the same level they had been under Obama. Here we're seeing that kind of the number of people apprehended at the border went up in 2019. And that single adults were making a smaller proportion. There were more family units. And that's the big change there, is families coming together. Now let's talk about the Biden administration, 2021 to January 2025. He did over 535 immigration executive actions compared to 472 during the first Trump administration. So Biden passed more executive orders than President Trump in his first administration. And those are executive orders dealing with immigration. Again, yet the impression was that Biden was not doing anything. And that's why there were lots of people trying to come in. And he actually continued with Title 42, which was started under the Trump administration. He continued with it. He didn't end it right away. And again, Title 42 allows them to deport people without a chance without giving them a chance to make their case. He even expanded the number of countries included as part of Title 42 that would get deported without a chance to make a case. He did allow for a lot of exceptions. 187,000 people were exempted from 2022 to 2023. Although there were people there was critique that the countries he was given favoritism to demonstrated potential racism going on there. It did expire in May 2023, and then people were allowed to make their case. One of the issues that he tried to deal with is that people were trying to circumvent lawful pathways, meaning they were finding that people, were not coming in through legal ports of entry. They were trying to come between legal ports of entry. And so he was trying to get people to come in legally and apply and so forth. He created the CPB-1 app, like a phone app. And they could not qualify for asylum if they did not go through that phone app and get an appointment. And so this again was to incentivize people to use the legal ports of entry. But again, then they were asked to wait in Mexico or a third country before they could come into the US. Again, another thing Biden did similar to Trump's first administration was this third country asylum policy, where refugees needed to show that they had applied for asylum in a country on their way to the United States. So they couldn't cross a bunch of countries from South America or the Caribbean on their way to the United States and get asylum in the US without having applied for it somewhere before. And so that was a Trump policy that Biden continued. The CPB-1 app allowed, at one point that I checked, 740 appointments per day. But it had, it had the issue, people referred to it as the asylum ticket master, because it's like they had to be ready at the exact time that you needed to apply that second, otherwise you had no chance of getting one. There were also issues with access. If you're a poor person seeking asylum, running for your life, to have a cell phone that's good enough to run the app, to have Wi-Fi access. And then there were also issues because people were supposed to take their own pictures, and there were these reported issues that people who were darker would try to take a picture and it wouldn't recognize them as taking a picture. And so they had a harder time. And there was a huge backlog. There were more than 2 million court case backlog in April of 2023. So a lot of people waiting to be able to make their case, to be able to come into the US legally. During the Biden administration, in December of 2023, there was an interesting change that happened where most border encounters now involved people from countries other than Mexico and the Northern Triangle. Northern Triangle is a reference to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, those Central American countries. And so other countries now making up 54%, and a large percentage of that being Venezuela and China. Let's see, encounters with migrants at the US-Mexico border, peaking in December of 2023 and then plummeting since. And so this is looking from the year 2000 to January of 2024, just numbers going up and down. Peak in 2023 and then down August 24. Now we get to the current Trump administration from January to April of 2025. President Trump in the second administration is a lot more active than in the first. He has already passed 175 immigration actions compared to 30 during the same period in his first term. So he hit the ground running. Now, 33 of those 175 have been against legal migration, not against illegal, especially targeting refugees. He ended the refugee resettlement program. He's no longer allowing people to apply for asylum at the border. There were 100,000 people who had already been vetted and approved for asylum, 100,000 people, and they just got canceled. He's ending it, but there is one exception. That exception is what they call the Convention Against Torture. So people who can prove they've been tortured by their government is the exception. Yet he's also working on another exception, and that's to restart allowing white minorities to seek asylum if they're fleeing South Africa because of what they claim is persecution. And so you could see a Elon Musk connection there with South African whites having an exception made for them as well. Then there's TPS. TPS protections, they're saying they're not going to renew TPS for 4 million people. People from Haiti, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Afghanistan, and Cameroon in Africa. They're also revoking student visas. There's a lot of information unknown about this. It's believed that there's 1,700 student visas that have been revoked, although some sources claim that it could be much higher, like 5,000. Most of these student visas get revoked and they don't get told why. They're not given a reason. With that said, there's been many that have been for pro-Palestine activism. And there were some that had to do with specific crimes like DUIs or stuff like that. And then interestingly enough, this past Friday, a few days ago, they said that this was being canceled, the revoking of these visas. So we'll see. I don't know what, I didn't look into it today to see if there's any follow-up on that. There's also been 50 legal challenges already 3 of them have gone to the Supreme Court. And those 3 that have been resolved have, are backing up the fact that the executive branch does have ultimate authority over immigration. So it's giving the Trump administration the right to make decisions on immigration. But it is also upholding that immigrants have a constitutional right to due process, and that government policies are also up for the judicial review. And so this is saying you can't just arrest someone for no reason, no charge, no trial, and deport them to wherever. That due process needs to happen. People need to have some basic rights to know why they're being detained, why they're being deported, and have an opportunity to defend themselves. And then the judicial review, again, this is saying that the executive branch, the president, has the right to make policy on immigration, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be any checks and balances where the courts and the Supreme Court in particular can have a say on whether they're constitutional or not. One of those things that is right now being debated in the courts is the birthright citizenship. That if your parents are undocumented, then the baby will not get automatic US citizenship despite being born in the United States. So that is being debated in the courts right now. Oh, and so, there's 175 immigration actions. I'm not going to go over 175 of them, but I will go over maybe a dozen things. So, all right. During these first few months, Border Patrol has had a lot less migrant encounters at the US-Mexico border. There are a lot less people trying to cross into the United States from Mexico. And there's also something called the Roosevelt Reservation. This is where there's a very narrow 60-foot strip of land right along the border on the US side that belongs to the federal government. And that extends from the Pacific Ocean in California to the New Mexico and Texas state line. Once we get to Texas, a lot of that land is private land and not federal land. So on that, what they call the Roosevelt Reservation, the Trump administration has given it to the US Army. Now, this is all to circumvent the fact that the US military, the US Army, is limited. They're basically not allowed to do law enforcement work within the United States. Our military is meant to defend the country, especially abroad. And so, but in order to circumvent that, he put them on this federal land and gave it to them to say, they're just there because that's where we put them. But, they're not doing law enforcement, although obviously that's their purpose. So now most arrests by ICE, even, before this, did not come from people crossing illegally. They come from jails and prisons. And that's where that program I mentioned that started during the Obama administration, 287G, comes in. There's 135 counties that the sheriffs of those counties had agreements with 287G so that they can enforce immigration law. That was last year. This year, there's 456. So, there's been a quadrupling of sheriff's departments that applied for it. And there's an additional 107 pending that will be probably approved later in the year, not counting new applications. In Wisconsin, there were 8 counties with 287G agreements, and 4 new ones in the first 3 months of the Trump administration. Now, let me give you back up a little bit, give you a little bit of a big picture, and connect it to the first thing I talked about with civil law versus criminal law. And this part is my opinion on how I see things. And yeah, you don't have to agree with me. During the Obama administration, they were deporting more people than ever before. Yet, once it was, and doubled the size of ICE and all that. Yet, President Trump ran on this idea that nothing was being done, that we were being overrun, that they're sending in their worst and their rapists and criminals and so forth. And so again, reality did not play a significant factor in people's perception, despite us having more access to information than ever before. Trump got elected on that, and then he solidified himself, especially with the separation of families, as being very tough on immigration. He got the reputation on that, for that. It's just very sensationalist, right? It can really hit, it's a strong anecdote, the separation of children. Then, when running against Biden, it was, again, the Republicans were saying, President Trump was saying that if Biden was elected, he was going to let everyone in, that, we were going to get overrun. And people, not only in the United States, but people abroad heard that message and believed it. Hence, there were more people than ever trying to get into the United States. And he did increase the amount of refugees that would be allowed, but nowhere near the number of the people that were being encountered at the US-Mexico border. Ironically, because of all the people that they were encountering at the US-Mexico border, it allowed Biden to end up with a larger number of deportations than Trump during his first administration. Well, I'm sorry, not a larger number, just about the same. It's a tiny fraction less. Yeah, it was 1.5 versus 1.49. So, yeah, very, about the same. But, and so then now that we have President Trump in his first 100 days, really hit the ground running, he is trying to deport as many people as possible, but he's finding it harder because there's less easy ones to get right along the US-Mexico border where they just encounter. During Biden, they were literally giving themselves up. They would cross the border and then wait to get picked up so that they could apply for asylum. So he was picking up a lot of people easily. They were literally giving themselves up. And so now President Trump wants to deport more than ever, but he's having a harder time because he doesn't have the easy ones at the US-Mexico border coming in. Again, I think because of that reputation, you know, not because of anything actually that Biden did much different from Trump, because Biden did a lot of the same things as Trump, especially during his first administration. But and then there was also even the Trump administration during these first months has also, you know, sort of like they're making sure the message gets, they're trying to make sure the message gets to Latin America. Don't come here. We're going to deport you. They in Mexico, they started putting ads on TV, telling people don't go to the United States. We're gonna, I think it was Kristi Noem, head of Department of Homeland Security, saying this, you know, we're gonna deport you if you try to come in illegally. And the Mexican president Sheinbaum said that they're not going to allow those commercials anymore, that they'll allow you know, private US companies from putting commercials, but not US government propaganda, especially discriminatory information. And so that's interesting. So they're, you know, they really are trying to relay that message, and that message has gone across. So now, because they, you know, because they don't have, you know, sort of the easy, the give, you know, the people who give themselves up, most of the deportations come from people who get encountered by police and are held in jails and prisons. So then ICE will go to jails and prisons to pick them up. And then the other thing is just trying to find more ways to deport people with as little due process as possible, if any, and creating new laws so that they can be criminals and make it easy again. So one of those things is a registry. President Trump, in his first week in office, announced that he was going to start a registry that people who are undocumented in the United States need to register, biometric registration. They need fingerprints and a picture, and you know, they need to basically report themselves to the government and give their information to the government. And they're just screwed either way. Screwed if they do, screwed if they don't. Because if they register, then they've given President Trump all their information so they can pick them up at home or at work or wherever. And if they don't, then that, if they don't do it within 30 days, then of January 20th, then they are committing a crime. They're subject to a fine and subject to going to jail. And so they're just between a rock and a hard place. And there's no doubt that this is going to be used against them because there's federal databases of information that in the past were not allowed to cooperate with ICE. But now all those databases, including the IRS for people who pay taxes, now they can be penalized for paying taxes. The FBI and the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, are also being used, diverted from their jobs to focusing on immigration as well, to help them catch more people. Trump also asserted his right to be able to arrest people in sensitive locations, where in the past they've tried not to go to sensitive locations. In the past, they've found that it wasn't necessary to do things like this, but now they've said that they can do it anywhere. So that includes schools, picking up children at schools for being undocumented, arresting people at churches, arresting people at hospitals, and arresting people in the lobbies of courts when they show up to renew whatever, or for whatever purpose they show up to a court. Now they can be picked up in the lobbies on their way to court dates and appointments. And that app, the CPB-1 app, has been changed to CPB Home. And this is for undocumented people to report their self-deportation. And I'm not sure what the incentive is to them doing that. But supposedly there's 5,000 people that have used the app and reported that they've self-deported. I don't think that's been confirmed in any way. But at any rate, this also reminds me of repatriation in the 1930s during the Great Depression, where most people weren't deported. They were just pressured and scared, frightened into leaving. And one of the issues with that is also that the majority of the people that self-deported or repatriated, the majority were US citizens, not undocumented, not the undocumented immigrants. Yes.
What are the numbers on that registered undocumented? Like, did a lot of people register for that? Like, did they pick the rock over the hard place?
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. I don't know the numbers, and I don't know that they've been released. Yeah, I haven't seen anything with the numbers.
And if they're undocumented, I can't really get the percentage of them. You don't know.
Yeah, there's so during Obama, people would say that there were almost 10 million undocumented people in the United States. During right now, some people claim it could be more like 13 million, although you know, the Trump administration, when it was campaigning, was saying that it was probably 20 million now, that it had doubled. But I do think that's an overestimation. But it is possible that it could be at, you know, about 13. Yeah, but I haven't seen any numbers of how many people have registered. And then yeah, and then it'd be even harder to know what percentage of them. Yeah. During these first few months, there have been flights of deportation to Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Ecuador, Peru, India, and even Guantanamo Bay prison, where we kept people we said were terrorists during the war on terror. By the way, that reminds me, that registry, this registry, this is the first time that we've required people to register. Where do I have it? It's the first time since 9/11 that we've had people register. And after 9/11, we had immigrant men from Muslim countries were required to register. And so it's the first time since 9/11 that we've done a registry like that. And we've also made agreements with Guatemala, El Salvador, Panama, and Costa Rica. And so this means agreements for those countries to accept the people that we're deporting, even if those people are not from those countries. Then we also, the Trump administration also designated Tren de Aragua and 7 other drug cartels as terrorist organizations. And so, and this connects to this next one of trying to use the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to detain and or deport Venezuelans. And so with the 1798 Alien Enemies Act is the idea that we have foreign enemies that are invading the United States, you know, to like sabotage or cause harm in the United States. And so designating them terrorist organizations makes it easier to do that. And we sent 238 Venezuelans to CCOT. CCOT is a new prison in El Salvador. I talked about it when I lectured on street gangs, prison gangs, and MS-13 and El Salvador. So 238 Venezuelans were sent there. They claimed that they're members of Tren de Aragua, which we've now designated as a terrorist organization. So Tren de Aragua is the new boogeyman. Before that, it was MS-13, and there were 23 MS-13 alleged MS-13 members also sent there. Now these people, the evidence that they are Tren de Aragua is just their interpretation of their tattoos or their social media, or in the case of Venezuelans, not even that, just honestly, just being Venezuelan. And not yet being a permanent legal resident or citizen in the US. Being here under some other status, including visas or temporary residency, or being in the process of working out their asylum case. The United States gave El Salvador $15 million to take these, about 250 people. Some estimate close to 300. Now, 75% of these people have no criminal convictions or even criminal charges that have ever been, there's no evidence of them having any criminal convictions or even criminal charges. 22% of them do have a criminal record. 12 of them, 12 of 238 were accused of murder, rape, assault, or kidnapping. But even among the 22%, the vast majority are for nonviolent offenses like theft, shoplifting, and trespassing. So this means that basically for one row of people here that do have a criminal record that is murder, rape, assault, or kidnapping, the brush of these people is being applied to all 25 rows of people here. And again, without an opportunity to defend themselves, having a court case without due process. And this prison is a top security, massive prison in El Salvador. It is where they put like 120% of MS-13 members from El Salvador. The country itself did it to itself. And when I say 100%, that means they made sure that they got everyone they could who is an MS-13 member, or 18th Street, the other one there, and anyone who might be suspected, even with very little to no evidence. The police were given quotas of people, the number of people they had to catch. And so, yeah, there's a significant percentage of people that are innocent that were included, put into that prison. And the prison is only a few years old. So I do think it's exaggerated when people say, they're in this prison and they're in this prison for life. They're never getting out. But it is worth pointing out that the president of El Salvador said that he has no intention of releasing anyone that goes in, that they go in and they're going to die there. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that's his full intention. And yeah, the people there are stripped naked on a regular basis. Their heads are shaven by force. Yeah, and they're put in these very what's the word? Demeaning positions and torture and so forth. And so that's why I conclude with this question of, do we learn from history? Or do we simply keep repeating the worst mistakes? We think that we're past our worst mistakes. But I'd argue if we're not careful, we have a reason to believe we can definitely repeat them.